Interfacing. Love it or hate it, most sewing patterns call for it. And if you choose the wrong one or put it in the wrong way, your end result is guaranteed to look homemade. Today I'm sharing how to choose the right weight interfacing for your fabric and how to put it in correctly so the end result is practically invisible. No one will know it's there, not even you. So keep watching. Hi, I'm Tony, and this is So Lounge. Now, choosing the right weight interfacing for your fabric is the number one thing you need to get right to make sure that your garment doesn't look homemade, because the wrong weight can totally ruin a project. Now, ask me how I know. One of my favorite jackets is guilty of having horrible interfacing. And every time I wear it, I think like, oh, I can't believe I did this. But back in 2022, this was one of the first jackets that I made. I had like a sewing sleeves in September back then. I made 3 jackets in 3 weeks. And while I love this jacket and I love wearing it, every time I put it on, I kind of cringe because the interfacing is too heavy for this fabric. Now, when I was making the project and I went to buy interfacing, I was thinking, oh, I'm making a jacket. I need jacket weight interfacing, which would have been fine. So if I'd been using like a nice heavy twill or maybe some kind of a worsted wool and one of those kind of heavier fabrics that you would kind of envision in your head to make a jacket from, sure, jacket weight interfacing would have worked great. But I used broadcloth. This is an Alexander Henry fabric. It is 100% cotton and it's just a basic plain weave. So I don't need that much stability and stiffness that I would need if I was using a heavier weight fabric. And I just didn't think about that until after I put it in. I think I'll come back to this when I go to Joann's. So I'm at the interfacing section of Joann's, which, let's face it, this is where most of us shop because this is one of the last few box fabric stores left in the country. Now, interfacing is color coded, so when you're using it for apparel fabric, you want to go with the pinkish colored interfacing. Blue's embroidery, yellow is craft. I don't know what green is, but it doesn't matter because this is what we want up here at the top. Now, when you are looking at the edge of the interfacing, you can tell a lot from the bolt, and you want to make sure that you are not getting this one with a sewing machine on it, because that means it's sew-in interfacing, which is more difficult to work with. You can use it if you want, but I don't recommend it. What you are looking for is the bolt that has the little iron on it. That means that it is iron in interfacing, and that's what you want. Now, there are a variety of different weights. If you look carefully at each bolt, most of them will have this little piece of paper with instructions, and then that will give you additional information. Sometimes it says the actual fabrics. This is a fusible featherweight. This is for lightweight to medium weight fabrics. They also have a stiffer one. Where is that up here? It's for collars and cuffs. And let me see, maybe it might be this one, this Easy Shaper. No, this is another lightweight, medium weight. This one's actually a little bit lighter than the feather weight. This is Easy Shaper, 100% polyester. It's a little bit lighter. So you want to go through and touch the different weights and kind of get a feel for it in comparison with your fashion fabric. But this is the section you want to focus on, and we'll go into a little bit more detail in just a sec. As you can see from the selection that I just showed you at Joann's, there are a lot of different options for interfacing. And as mentioned, the best way to figure out the proper interfacing for your fabric is to touch the two and compare. And the thing to keep in mind is that you want the interfacing to support the fabric, but you do not want it to change the way the fabric hangs or drapes or like the hand of the fabric. So with this jacket, I'll take it off the dress form. You can see that it's pretty soft. This is what is commonly referred to as quilting cotton. However, the fabric name is actually broadcloth. You can see when I put this on that the jacket itself is fairly soft, But then you got these really stiff lapels happening here and this whole front panel and the tops of the pockets. You can see how the pockets kind of hang out a little bit because they are stiffer than the rest of the fabric. That is not what you want to happen when you choose interfacing. I should have used the featherweight interfacing for this jacket, which would have been perfect. This is kind of a light to medium weight broadcloth, and that would have given me a little bit softer look, so it didn't kind of clash so much. Now I wear this with jeans to conferences, so it's not super, you know, noticeable. But for me personally, it kind of drives me crazy that I really didn't pay attention to this and I wasn't thinking, because I was thinking jacket, use jacket weight interfacing. So don't do that. Now sometimes lightweight to medium weight is too heavy. So here is some fusible featherweight. You can see that it's a little bit thick. This is for lightweight, medium weight fabrics, and this would have worked great for my jacket. However, it probably wouldn't work as well for a lighter fabric like lawn. So this is a dress I made, I think last year, year before, I don't remember. I love this dress. It is a McCall's pattern, super easy. Like, let me hold up this dress and you can see it's a super soft fabric. That is one of the properties of lawn. It is slightly sheer. You can kind of see through it a little bit. And this lightweight fusible interfacing was going to be way too thick for this very tiny neck facing that I had to put on this. So in those instances, when your fabric is super lightweight and you can't find the very, very lightweight interfacing, you can switch over to knit interfacing. Yes, they make interfacing for knit. It has a little bit of stretch in it, usually along the weft, so right to left stretch, but not so much from top to bottom. So in this case, when I made this dress, I really wasn't happy with this type of non-woven, and I decided to just go with the knit, which was perfect. So it's very, very lightweight. It gives it a tiny bit of shaping against the fabric, but it's not going to change the overall look of the dress. Think about how crazy it would look if I use this weight interfacing with this type of fabric. It just would not work. And that's another little secret that you can use to kind of, if it's not, even if it's not a knit fabric. This works great with knit fabrics when you need some stabilization. You want to stabilize a neckline because you're going to fold it under. This is fantastic, you know. So I always have a bunch of knit interfacing on hand because in a pinch, it pretty much will work for anything to give it stability. It's not going to change the hand of the fabric or the drape of the fabric because it's so super soft and lightweight. It comes in black and white. These non-wovens that are the most popular kind of interfacing, they mostly come in white. Occasionally you can find them in black, but they always have black and white knit interfacing. So that's another thing to consider for your fabric. If you're using a darker background fabric like this lawn, using white interfacing was probably going to show through, which I did not want to do. You can always go buy like a quarter of a yard interfacing in a different weights, and then you can test them out and see what works best for you. Now, as I mentioned, the little papers on these have instructions on how to put in the interfacing. And sometimes it has the information about the specific weight and what it's used for. So this one is called Sheer Tailor, S-H-I-R, like shirt without the T. So it looks like shirt ailer or shirt tailor as like one word. And this is specifically for collars and cuffs. Now, this would be one of those instances where your fabric might be soft, but you want a stiff cuff and a stiff collar. Think about a man's dress shirt. Most of them are made out of poplin, and that's like a nice weight fabric. And you want the shirt itself to be soft, but you want a stiff collar and cuffs to wear with a suit and, you know, wear a necktie and all that good stuff. So they do have more specific interfacing for those sorts of things, but you wouldn't necessarily want to use this for the neckline or maybe if you're doing an armhole facing, because it would be too much stiffness in comparison to the rest of the dress, and that's when it would be better to use this lightweight fusible. If your fabric is soft, you want to use a lighter weight interfacing. So featherweight is a good place to start if you're using any kind of a broadcloth or basic plain weave. If it's a really soft, light fabric like lawn or voile or file, those are all very light, airy kind of fabrics, you might want to even use a knit interfacing because then it's even lighter than that. The heavier your fabric and the stiffer your fabric, you can go with a heavier weight interfacing. So it's really just about touching the different interfacings and feeling the textures and thicknesses of them in order to determine which one would be best with your fabric. And overall, the overall arching principle is that you never want the interfacing to kind of stand out off of your garment, like my lapel here on this jacket. It's very stiff. It likes to hang out all by itself. I mean, it hangs out by itself. You don't want that to happen. And so just keep in mind that you want it to be as invisible as possible. And that is going to be based on using the lightest weight interfacing for whatever fabric you're using. My friend Nancy gave me a whole bunch of books, and one of the little flyers that was stuffed in there was this really fun Interfacing the Foundation of Fashion from the Handler Textile Corp. Now, I believe this company is the one that is the competitor of PELLON. I got on their website to see, number one, if they still existed. They do. And number two, if they had this in download format, which they do not. But interesting things about this is they actually have all of their products listed out and then very specifically what type of fabric to use. So I got on the PELLON website to see if they had a download. They do not. If that's something you were interested in getting information about, I'm thinking about putting together a PDF, but I do not want to go through all the trouble of having to go through each individual listing for the product and writing down, you know, the different fabrics that it's good for, unless that's something you're interested in. So be sure to leave a comment below. Say, yes, I'd love a PDF to help me with this, and I will put that together in my spare time. So moving on, next I'm going to demonstrate how to properly put in interfacing. We're going to do a couple of different types with a couple of different fabrics so you can kind of get a feel for the different, it's kind of the same process, but you can kind of see how the different interfacings react to different types of fabric. Back in college, when I was learning to sew, I bought some iron-in interfacing, and I was having a really hard time with it. And I asked my professor what was wrong, and she said, iron-in interfacing doesn't ever work. You need to use sew-in interfacing. And as a result, most of my projects in college were made with sew-in interfacing, which is more complicated to handle and requires more steps. That's the whole reason they made iron-in interfacing, was so you don't have to use sew-in interfacing. Now, it wasn't until I took private sewing lessons during my senior year of college that I finally found out how to properly insert iron-in interfacing. Let's start off with, it's a total misnomer because you don't iron it in, you press it in. It's only called iron-in because you use an iron to achieve the adhesion between the fabric and the interfacing, but you don't actually iron it. And that's where I was going wrong. When you iron, you're going to move your iron back and forth, press out all the creases. And if you've ever done that with iron-in interfacing, you know that you have a total mess and your fabric bunches up and the interfacing is lumpy at best, and at worst it starts melting all over your iron. So I'm going to show you how to do it correctly and the method that I specifically use. Now, I always use a press cloth. I actually use two. I put one down on my ironing board so that in the event the interfacing moves, it sticks to the press cloth and it does not stick to my ironing board because I don't want to pick that up later when I'm actually ironing and have to go clean my iron. And then I also use a press cloth on top. My first step is to give the fashion fabric a quick steam first and make sure it's nice and warm before I put the interfacing on. Now, you can totally iron this. This is just the fabric by itself. So my fabric's warm and it's nice and smooth. and then taking my interfacing and I'm putting it on top. Now, you want to put the side with the little dots on it against the wrong side of your fabric, okay? I feel like when your fabric's a little bit warm, you can kind of press it together a little bit. Next, add your press cloth on top. Now, this is where different types of interfacing, different weights of interfacing may have different instructions on how to set your iron. I usually have my iron set between wool and cotton linen, so it's on the higher end of the iron setting with medium to high steam. Not super high steam because my iron will spit, but towards that side of it as opposed to the less steam side. Now, I'm using a Rowenta. This is a AccuSteam iron. You can get them for under 40 bucks on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. This iron has a ton of little holes to super steam your fabric. Now, when you insert iron in interfacing, you want to make sure that you press, steam, and hold it. So when I was going through the little interfacing handout that I found, they have principles of fusing. A marriage of fashion fabric and interfacing creates a permanent bond. And there's some funny little drawings which I'll put up for you to see. You can see that there are 3 elements to fusing: steam, which is the passion, pressure, which is the hug, and time, cooling off. So first steps first, we've got the steam. I am using muslin as my press cloth, which is super heat tolerant. It's 100% cotton, and that's what I use. Next, you want to apply pressure to your fabric and interfacing as you slowly work your way down to make sure you create that permanent bond. And last but not least, you have to let it cool. That's part of the process. You have to let it cool off. You know, you want it to be cooler to the touch than it would be. And if you've done that correctly, you should have a very stable, perfectly fused interfacing. Now, a couple of things. When you read the instructions on the packaging, it will say to clip down your interfacing anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch smaller than your pattern piece. Now, I don't do that. You can. Me personally, I think it's a waste of time. Eventually, you're going to go in and clip those and trim those seams anyway. Interfacing is not so bulky that it's going to create this massively huge seam. And if you're doing any kind of a serging for seam finish, it'll cut it off eventually. I just don't think it's worth the extra step. But it's totally up to you because you're the one sewing your own clothes. So it's really what your personal preference is. I know Jen likes to trim all her interfacing before she faces it. I find that when I've done that, inevitably it stretches and it'll be, you know, part of in one seam and not in the other. Whereas if I just keep it all the same size, it works out better. Now, if there's any little pieces of interfacing hanging off, sometimes I'll go back and trim those all off. But that's basically how it works. And as long as you follow those 3 steps of steam, pressure, and time, you're going to have a successful interfacing marriage of fabric and interfacing. One thing I decided to do is show you some of the different weights of interfacing. So this first piece I use, this is broadcloth fabric, 100% cotton with the featherweight interfacing. I'm also going to do the same fabric with a knit interfacing, and then I'm also going to use a heavier, this is the one for the collars and cuffs, the shirt, shoot, I've forgotten the name of it, shirt tailor interfacing. So this is the stiffer one for that. And then not only that, but I'm going to do it on a couple of different fabrics. So I'm going to also use some linen. This is a cotton and flax blend. I'm going to use some lawn. This is 100% cotton. I'm going to use some rayon broadcloth, which is much softer than its cotton counterpart. And then I'm also going to show you how knit interfacing will stabilize knit fabric. So stay tuned while I get those all pressed, and then I will show you the differences between them. Couple of additional points. When you read the instructions, some of them will say you can damply spray your press cloth for some added moisture. I usually don't do that. I have a super, super steamy iron, and I think that, it depends on how much steam your iron puts out. Mine puts out a lot. As you can see, like, it's a lot of steam. You can actually see it on camera. I don't add any additional moisture, but if you don't have quite the steam capabilities that I do, like I said, you can always add a little bit of moisture, just have a little spray bottle ready. Other thing to keep in mind is that any kind of interfacing, it's all put in the same way. So it doesn't matter if it's non-woven or knit, it's basically the same process of steam, pressure, and time to make sure that that interfacing creates a long-lasting bond to your fabric that will last through wash and wear. This is my original broadcloth fabric without any interfacing attached to the back. I'm just going to drape it over my finger so you can kind of see just that's what the natural drape and hand of the fabric is going to be. Now, when compared to the knit, the drape of the two is very similar. Obviously, the knit gives it a little tiny bit more stability, but all in all, it's not a huge change. But when I compare that to the featherweight for medium to lightweight fabrics, you can see that there's definitely more stiffness involved in there. And then when I use the shirt fuse, it's way stiffer than the original fabric. Next, we can move on to the linen. Here's the linen fabric. It's a very soft linen. It is a flax and cotton blend. And then we have that compared to the knit, which is going to be pretty similar. It really didn't change the natural drape or hand of the linen, but it did give it a tiny bit more stability. The lightweight fusible, you can see it's made it a little bit stiffer. And then the shirt fuse is definitely the stiffest of the three. Knit interfacing hasn't really changed the stretch of the knit fabric. It is stretching from right to left, so it's stretching in the direction of the weft grain, but it hasn't changed the lengthwise grain, which is the warp, very much. This fabric is jersey, so it didn't really stretch that much in that direction anyway. It does provide a nice stabilization, so if you were going to turn this under and then top stitch to finish a neck edge, it will give it that more stability, so it's not going to like pucker, it's going to stay smooth, and it's going to behave better than it would without the additional stabilization. Rayon broadcloth, you can see this fabric is very, very soft without any interfacing. And then let's compare to the knit interfacing. It's definitely providing more stability, but not a whole lot to really change the way that the fabric is going to hang. The lightweight fusible definitely is more stabilizing than the fabric by itself. And then you can see how the shirtwaist fuse is definitely the stiffest of the three. And last, we will move on to the lawn. This is Liberty 10 lawn, so it is really super gorgeous and soft. This is the knit interfacing. It has given it stability, just like all the other pieces. This would probably be the best option for interfacing the neckline of my Matisse dress, so if I end up remaking it in a smaller size, I might adjust that. I think I used the lightweight interfacing, which would have been this one, which is okay. It does definitely change the hand of the lawn. And then this is the shirt fuse one for the cuffs and collars, and it's very, very stiff by comparison. Once you have checked the hand to make sure it's the right interfacing for you, you want to also make sure that you have a good bond between the interfacing and the fabric. So to do that, you can roll it, you can fold it, see how it's holding. You don't want any of the pieces of any of the interfacing peeling off at the edges. So, just test out your interfacing with your fabric and make sure that everything is working. Now, if it's not, there are 3 reasons that your interfacing may not have properly attached to your fabric if you're having problems once you do the rolling, testing, folding, to make sure. First off is that your fabric is incompatible with interfacing. Now this could be a fabric that is treated for water resistance on both sides. It could be a vinyl coated fabric. It could also be like some kind of, I'm trying to think of like synthetic fabrics that interfacing doesn't like, maybe a nylon, like a ripstop nylon. It may not be compatible with that, in which case you would probably have to go back to some sew-in interfacing if that's the case and your fabric is not compatible. Next would be the technique for putting the interfacing and attaching it to your fabric. So one thing would be there could be cold spots, meaning that you didn't get all of the interfacing attached to your fabric. There are parts where, the resin didn't get hot enough to be able to adhere to the fabric. It's easy to go back in and just fix it and run your iron on your interfacing, use your press cloth, just repeat the steps. Maybe this time hold it down longer and, apply more steam to make sure that all of the fabric and interfacing has been covered. And then the other thing you can do is you can flip your fabric over and then add more steam and pressure from the right side of the fabric so that the interfacing side is down, and that will create a better bond than if you just do it from one side. And then also it could be an issue of too much moisture. So if you're using a spray bottle, make sure that you might want to back down on that a little bit. If you're using really, really heavy steam and your interfacing isn't sticking to your fabric, it could be because there's too much. So those are other things to check out. And then third, if your fabric if you're seeing strike through, which is basically the little adhesion bubbles of the interfacing coming through to the right side of the fabric, and you can see like little dots, it's the wrong weight interfacing for your fabric. So you want to go to a lower interfacing. And then the other thing would be like bubbling. Your interfacing is just not working with your fabric. You've either moved it or kind of pushed it a little bit, or you didn't have it flat in the first place, so that as you're pressing it in, it's moving. So those are 3 things to check for to make sure that your interfacing is attached properly and that it is going to stay where it's supposed to against your fashion fabric and inside of your garment. Knowing the weight of interfacing to choose for your fabric and then how to apply it so that you get a professional look is going to totally change your interfacing game. Now, once you have a bunch of different samples, this will be a great time to put these together into a little sample book. If you tend to use the same types of fabrics over and over like I do, I use a lot of broadcloth, I use a lot of linen, I use a lot of lawn, that's going to help you just remember how the different interfacings look once you attach them to your fabric, so you don't have to go through this process every single time you start a new project and then have to, try it out with a new fabric. If you've enjoyed this video, you totally want to check out this one coming up next. It's going to help you, you're going to love it, and I'll see you over there.